This seat isn't for people like you." The words didn't fall, they detonated. They came sharp, dripping with contempt, loud enough for every man at the table to hear and laugh with. And then, as if words weren't enough, the man in the tailored suit lifted his glass and tipped it slow, deliberate. Red wine cascaded over her head, soaking into her white blazer until it bloomed like a wound across her chest. The room erupted. A chorus of smirks and chuckles, fingers pointing as though humiliation were entertainment. Someone slapped the polished mahogany, barking laughter like a hyena. Another leaned back in his leather chair, shaking his head with mock pity. What did she expect? A crown? In this room? She didn't move, not even a flinch. The phone in her hand remained against her ear, the line open, her silence louder than their cruelty. Droplets slid down her jaw, down to the table, where they gathered in a dark pool reflecting her face calm, unreadable, unbroken. "Tell me," another voice spat from across the table, "how does it feel to play dress-up at a table built by men?" The word men hung like smoke, heavy with arrogance. Laughter followed again, uglier this time, bouncing against the paneled walls. The air thickened. The expensive chandelier above didn't shine, it glared. Every laugh was a cut. Every sneer a reminder that this wasn't a meeting. It was a trial, and they had already declared her guilty of existing. In the far corner, a young analyst froze mid-note. His pen hovered above the paper, ink bleeding into one spot. He wanted to record, to speak, to intervene, but his chest tightened with fear. What stunned him most wasn't their cruelty, it was her composure. She sat, soaked, humiliated in appearance but untouchable in presence. The man who had poured the wine grinned wider, circling his empty glass in the air like a trophy. "Stand up," he barked. "Before we call security, you don't belong here. You never will." But she did not stand. She did not defend. She simply breathed in, slow and measured, as if each insult was nothing but air feeding the fire inside. She stayed anchored to her chair, as if the table itself answered to her. Because storms don't shout when they arrive, they wait, steady, inevitable. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. One final drop of wine traced her cheekbone and fell onto the table. She let it fall. She let it stain, because stains can be washed out. But the shame of this moment, the memory of their laughter that would live with them far longer than the wine would cling to her suit. And in that stillness, something shifted. The laughter thinned. Their smiles faltered. Because what they saw in her eyes wasn't defeat, it was promise. The promise that their performance was over. She hadn't walked into that boardroom by accident. Every step that carried her to the head of the table had been calculated. From the plain leather portfolio in her hand to the absence of a single flashy accessory, she came in stripped of symbols. No diamond watch, no designer bag, no entourage trailing her heels. Just a white suit, understated heels, and the kind of calm that made people underestimate her. That was the point, because power doesn't need decoration. It waits. To the men circling that table, she was just another diversity hire, another token face to parade in the annual report. They didn't know she had signed the very contracts that kept their bonuses alive. They didn't know she held more shares than the loudest 5 of them combined. They didn't know that her name, etched on legal filings and corporate registries, was the reason the building itself belonged to her. But she knew, and she let them pretend otherwise, for a reason. This wasn't the first room that tried to erase her. At 23, she had walked into a real estate office with her first commission check. Clean, legitimate, earned. The broker smiled, then locked her account for verification. Weeks later, the same man approved a smaller deposit from someone who looked more like him. At 30, she sat in a hotel lobby waiting for a client. Security asked for her ID 3 times while a row of suited men passed unbothered. At 36, she bought that hotel chain outright. Now, at 42, she was in a room full of men who still believed appearances told the whole story. And they had no idea they were rehearsing the same mistake history had already written a dozen times. The wine still clung to her jacket, drying into darker stains across the fabric. She let it stay. Symbols matter, and in this moment, the stain was no longer their joke, it was evidence. The intern in the corner shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the silent phone on the table in front of her. He couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but he noticed the tiny green light blinking. A live line. Someone was listening. Someone was documenting. Her gaze swept the room slowly, deliberately. Each director avoided her eyes, except the one still smirking. He leaned back in his chair, arrogance dripping from his posture. "I've been in this seat 20 years, he bragged. "You think walking in here dressed in white makes you one of us?" She said nothing, because silence was her armor. In that silence, the air shifted again. The laughter had softened into nervous mutters, but they didn't realize why. The storm was already moving quiet, invisible, relentless. And while they mocked her presence, what they couldn't see was that she had come not just to sit at their table, but to test it. Because sometimes power doesn't walk into the room to be recognized. Sometimes it walks in to see who dares to expose themselves. The wine hadn't even dried before the next insult landed. "Someone get security," a voice growled from the far end of the table. The man was broad-shouldered, his tie knotted too tight, his jaw tight with the thrill of authority. "This isn't a charity meeting. We don't let strangers linger in the boardroom." A ripple of agreement followed. Chairs scraped against the floor as men leaned back, whispering to each other like schoolboys planning mischief. One chuckled, "Check her credentials. Bet she forged the invite." Another added, "Or stole it." These days, anyone with a printer thinks they can walk in. Their words weren't jokes anymore. They were charges, accusations designed to build a wall around her and push her out. The junior analyst in the corner froze again, his notebook abandoned. He could feel the line crossing. This wasn't teasing. This was an execution dressed in tailored suits. His eyes darted to her. She still hadn't moved. Her phone still lay face up on the table, the green light pulsing, documenting, witnessing. The smirking director raised his voice, louder now, confident in the tide. "Gentlemen, I motion that she be removed immediately. She's not a shareholder, not a director, not a partner. She's a distraction. Vote her out." Laughter erupted again, but under it was something else, a drumbeat of hostility growing louder, feeding on itself. One man reached for the landline on the credenza, his finger hovering above the button. "I'll call building security right now. They'll drag her out before this farce goes another minute." "Do it," another egged on. "Let's end this." The woman in white didn't react. She didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't even glance at the phone. Her stillness was a weapon sharper than any outburst. And yet, the escalation continued. "You know what's funny?" One of them sneered, leaning forward with both elbows on the table. "She really believed a pressed suit would get her past us. That jacket's ruined now. Might as well take it back to wherever she came from." The phrase "where she came from" hung in the air like smoke. Ugly. Intentional. The intern's stomach twisted. He had heard enough to know what was happening wasn't about business. It wasn't about protocol. It was about power, and the desperate men who felt it slipping. The director at the phone jabbed the button with satisfaction. The speaker crackled, and his voice rang sharp. "Security to the boardroom. We have an unauthorized individual. Immediate removal." The air shifted again. It wasn't laughter anymore, it was theater, a performance designed to humiliate her in front of witnesses. They wanted her dragged out. They wanted her erased, but she still sat, back straight, hands folded neatly on the table. She didn't stop the call. She didn't defend herself. She let the trap close. Because storms don't chase, they wait. And what none of them realized yet was that while they had just summoned security, she had already summoned something far greater. The boardroom waited for her to explode. That was the script they wanted: anger, shouting, chaos. Something they could point to and say, "See, she doesn't belong." But she didn't give them that. She stayed seated, her posture unbroken, hands folded on the table like stone carved into human form. The stain spread across her jacket, dripping steadily, but she left it untouched. To wipe it away would have meant acknowledging the humiliation. To leave, it meant control. Her silence was deafening. The man nearest her shifted in his seat, suddenly uneasy. "What? Nothing to say? No defense? No denial?" His voice carried a tremor, the first crack in a performance that had felt unshakable just minutes ago. Another director scoffed to fill the void. "Of course she's silent. Fraudsters always are when caught." His laughter was loud, exaggerated, like he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. The junior analyst watched closely, his pulse racing. He realized what made the silence unbearable. She wasn't cowering. She was observing, calculating, as if she were letting every insult pile onto a scale that would eventually collapse under its own weight. The man at the landline tapped the receiver impatiently. "Security will be here in minutes. Best prepare yourself." His grin was tight, but his eyes flickered with something else, doubt. Still, she said nothing. Instead, she reached slowly, deliberately, and set her phone flat on the table. The tiny green light blinked once, a live connection, a record. The realization sank into the room like a cold draft. Several pairs of eyes darted toward the device, then quickly away. One of the men muttered, "What's she doing? Is someone listening?" The smirker at the head of the pack waved a dismissive hand. "Even if she's recording, who cares? She's nobody. Nothing she has holds weight here." But his bravado rang hollow. The silence stretched on. The chandelier above hummed faintly. The ticking of a wall clock seemed suddenly louder. And every man in that room began to hear not their voices, not their laughter, but the sound of their own arrogance echoing back at them. She leaned back slightly, eyes sweeping across the room, meeting each gaze without a word. One by one, the chuckles faltered. The air tightened. The same men who had barked orders now fidgeted with their cufflinks, adjusted their ties, sipped nervously at half-empty glasses. The analyst thought, "She's not defending because she doesn't need to. She's already won something we can't see." Finally, the smirking director slammed a fist onto the table. "You think silence will save you? When security walks in, you'll be dragged out like the imposter you are." Her only response was a blink, slow, deliberate. It landed like a gavel, and in that moment, the power dynamic shifted just slightly, just enough, because what they had expected was rage. What they received was something far more dangerous, patience. And patience, in the hands of someone with real power, is lethal. The boardroom wasn't sealed off anymore. It had cracks, thin ones, but enough for truth to slip through. In the corner, the junior analyst's hand hovered above his phone. His palms were slick with sweat, but his instincts screamed louder than his fear. This wasn't just a meeting gone wrong. This was history repeating itself. He had watched the wine spill, heard the slurs, seen the silence, and now he couldn't look away. With a shaky breath, he slid the phone from his jacket pocket and tapped record. The red circle blinked to life, tiny but powerful, its glow casting a spotlight in a room that thought it was untouchable. One of the directors noticed. "Hey, put that away." His voice snapped sharp, authority cloaked in panic. "This is a private meeting." But the analyst didn't stop. He held the phone lower, angling it discreetly toward the table. His lips pressed together, his jaw set. For once, he wasn't taking notes for them. He was taking notes against them. The woman in white finally turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. No words passed between them, just a glance. But it was enough. He lowered the phone a fraction, unsure if he should continue. Then she spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, even. "Use your words, not your lens." The room froze. It wasn't a plea, it was an instruction. A reminder that justice isn't viral by default. It's spoken into existence. The analyst swallowed hard, tucked the phone halfway back into his jacket, and nodded. His courage didn't vanish, it transformed. He cleared his throat, the sound small but startling in the charged air. "She has every right to be here," he said, voice trembling but audible. Every head snapped toward him. The smirking director barked a laugh. "Oh, now the intern wants to play lawyer? Sit down, kid." But the words were already out, already alive, and they couldn't be shoved back into silence. Across the room, another figure stirred a younger associate, dark hair falling into her face, clutching a tablet. She had been silent through the jeers, her eyes fixed on the woman at the table. Now she shifted forward in her chair, her voice sharper. "He's right. You don't even know who she is, and you're treating her like a trespasser." The director scoffed. "She is a trespasser." "No," the associate shot back, louder this time. "You just don't want her here. That's different." "Ho." The boardroom crackled, not with laughter this time, but with unease. Two voices had broken rank, and the silence that followed was no longer in the director's control. The woman in white didn't thank them, didn't even nod. She didn't need to, because their courage wasn't for her, it was for themselves and for every witness in the room. And still, she sat steady. Her silence continued to press down, heavy, relentless, until even the men who had laughed the loudest now tugged at their collars, the wine on her jacket no longer looking like victory but like evidence staining their hands. The analyst clenched his phone tighter in his pocket, his heart racing. He realized something important. He wasn't filming to go viral. He was filming because the truth needed witnesses. And now the room had them. The storm was gathering more voices, and soon it wouldn't be containable. The boardroom door remained closed, but the temperature inside had changed. No longer smug amusement now, it was agitation, the kind that lashes out sharper with every second. At the far end of the table, a man in his late 50s leaned forward. His suit was immaculate, but his expression curdled with disdain. He was one of the longest-serving directors, the type whose word had weight even when it was wrong. His voice cut through the room like a cleaver. "Enough," he snapped. "This farce has gone on too long. You don't belong in this company, you don't belong in this room, and you certainly don't belong in that chair." The words dropped like stones, one after another, impossible to mistake as anything but contempt. His hand slammed flat against the table, rattling water glasses. "We've built this empire for decades. Men of vision, men of grit. And now you what? Think you can stroll in, hide behind silence, and pretend to be our equal? You're nothing but an intruder." The younger associate who had spoken earlier stiffened, her eyes wide. She opened her mouth, but the director's glare pinned her silent. He wasn't speaking to convince, he was speaking to crush. The woman in white remained motionless. She let him hurl every word like stones against a wall. None of them broke her. The junior analyst swallowed, his courage rattling in his chest. "She showed no documents because you never asked," he muttered, almost too quiet to hear. But it was heard. The director's head snapped toward him, fury flashing. "Quiet," the older man barked. "You'll be lucky to keep your internship after this. Don't mistake pity for permanence." A hush fell. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, loud as a drumbeat in the silence. And then, the director delivered the cruelest blow yet. "You think your skin and your silence make you untouchable? You're a fraud in a seat built for leaders. Real leaders. Not you. Never you." The insult hung heavier than the chandelier above them. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't coded. It was the kind of open contempt that scraped raw against every witness in the room. The analyst's stomach turned. The associate's eyes burned. Even the men who had laughed earlier shifted in their chairs, some looking at the table, others at their hands. The cruelty had gone from sport to spectacle, and it was harder now to pretend it was just business. The woman in white let the silence breathe. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She simply tilted her head, the faintest motion, as if memorizing every face in the room. Her hand brushed lightly against the phone on the table. The green light blinked once. The older man sneered. "Call security. Throw her out. Blacklist her from the building. Let this be the last time we waste minutes on her kind." The phrase "her kind" struck like a lash, deliberate and poisonous. And yet, she, Saturday still, silent, calm, because storms don't answer at the peak of arrogance. They wait for arrogance to tip itself over the edge. And this boardroom was teetering. The knock at the door came sharp, metallic. Security had arrived. 2 guards in black uniforms stepped into the boardroom, their presence sucking what little oxygen was left out of the air. They weren't briefed on details, just told there was an unauthorized guest. Their eyes swept the room, then landed on her, seated calm and still at the head of the table. "There," the older director barked, his voice laced with triumph. He jabbed a finger in her direction. "That's the one. Remove her immediately." "Ugh." The guards hesitated, glancing from the immaculate white suit to the wine stains streaked across it, then back to the rows of men in tailored arrogance. For a second, even they seemed uncertain. "Don't just stand there," the man snapped. "She's trespassing. Drag her out." One of the guards took a step forward, but before he could move further, the smirking director from earlier pushed his chair back and stood. His grin was wider now, drunk on the spectacle. "Allow me," he said, striding around the table. The room tensed. He came up behind her chair, his hand gripping the backrest. "On your feet," he ordered, voice pitched loud enough for every corner of the room. "This charade ends now." With a sharp tug, he yanked the chair backward, the legs screeching across the polished floor. Gasps erupted sharp, stunned. Even the guards froze. The sheer audacity of dragging a seated woman from the head of the boardroom table turned the air electric. But she didn't resist. Her body shifted with the motion, steady, balanced, as though anchored to the floor itself. Her hands never left the table. Her phone remained exactly where she had placed it. the green light blinking a silent witness. Up, he barked again, tugging harder. Stand or be thrown. She turned her head slowly, eyes locking onto his. The room fell quiet under the weight of that gaze. For the first time, his smirk wavered. You've made your last mistake, she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. The words landed heavier than a shout. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. One whispered, Are we sure about this? But the director at the far end slammed the table again. Don't question it. Remove her. The junior analyst's phone trembled in his hand. He wasn't hiding it anymore. The red recording light glowed openly now, catching every word, every gesture, every stain of arrogance. His chest pounded with fear, but also with something else. Conviction. The associate with the tablet stood suddenly. Stop! Her voice cracked like a whip. This isn't protocol. You're assaulting a board member. The room erupted in overlapping voices, directors shouting for silence, the guards asking for clarity, the younger staff whispering in disbelief. The chaos was complete, the balance teetering on collapse, and still she, Saturday. The chair tilted under the director's grip, but she remained grounded, spine straight, eyes steady. Because storms don't resist the first pull of arrogance. They let the pull continue until the rope snaps. And the rope in this boardroom was fraying fast. The boardroom roared with noise, voices clashing, orders flying, chairs scraping. But at the center of it all, she remained still. Her hand moved once, precise and deliberate. She tapped her phone. The green light blinked twice, then steadied. A clear voice cut through the chaos, amplified from the speaker. Yes, ma'am. Line secure. Protocol standing by. The room stilled. Several directors glanced at each other, confusion flickering in their eyes. The guards froze mid-step, their instincts warning them they had just stepped into something far above their pay grade. The man gripping her chair barked, Who is that? What protocol? She tilted her head slightly, her tone calm. Log this meeting, timestamp every insult, record every order given against me. The voice on the phone responded instantly. Understood. Audit file created. Live transcription active. The analyst's phone was still recording, but now it felt redundant. This wasn't just a witness anymore. This was documentation at a corporate level, official, unshakable, irreversible. What game are you playing? The older director demanded, his knuckles white against the table. No game, she said softly, but every syllable carried weight. Just accountability. The smirking director behind her tugged the chair again, though his grip had lost confidence. Don't listen to this nonsense. She's bluffing. Check the system, the associate with the tablet shot back. Her fingers flew across the screen, her eyes widening. She's not bluffing. There's an active executive log running right now. A ripple of unease swept through the room. She leaned forward, folding her hands atop the table, wine stains blooming deeper into the fabric of her jacket. Her voice was quiet but resonant. Continue if you like. Every insult, every act, it's already part of the record. The guards exchanged another glance. One cleared his throat. Sir, he addressed the older director cautiously. If she's in the system— Shut up, the man snapped, his composure cracking. She has no authority here. But his words no longer filled the room. The balance had shifted. The intern pressed the record button harder, as though anchoring himself to the moment. He realized something profound. She wasn't reacting, she was orchestrating. She glanced at her phone once more. Advance protocol to stage 2. Prepare verification release. The assistant's voice came crisp and immediate. Stage 2. Confirmed. Systems primed for identity reveal. Awaiting your signal. The color drained from more than one face around the table. Identity reveal? One of them muttered under his breath. The woman in white finally lifted her gaze, sweeping across every man in the room. Her eyes were steady, unwavering. You wanted security, she said softly. You'll have it, but not the kind you imagined. And with that, the storm began its turn from silence to thunder. The phone on the table pulsed once, then steadied into a green glow. A voice came through, crisp, formal, undeniable. Verification ready. All systems confirm executive override. Awaiting your authorization, Miss Carter. The boardroom went still. For the first time all afternoon, the men's laughter died completely. Their eyes snapped to her, confusion crawling into disbelief. Miss Carter? The name wasn't whispered, it thundered. The older director scoffed, desperate to reclaim ground. Miss Carter? That's absurd. She's no Carter. She's no one. But the associate with the tablet was already scrolling furiously. Her face paled as the truth leapt from the screen. She looked up, voice trembling but clear. She Island. Her name's on the master ledger. Ownership level. Executive override. The room's oxygen thinned. The junior analyst felt his phone slip in his damp hand. Ownership level. His heart raced as he replayed the past 30 minutes in his mind, every insult, every laugh, every order, all directed at the very person who owned the table they sat around. The smirking director behind her stumbled back a step, releasing his grip on her chair as if burned. No, no, this is impossible. She turned her head slowly, her voice low but cutting. You called me an intruder? In my own boardroom. The words sliced deeper than any shout. Gasps rippled. One man muttered a curse under his breath. Another dropped his pen, its clatter echoing like a gavel. Even the guards stiffened, eyes widening as the reality set in. They hadn't been called to remove an intruder. They'd been summoned to witness an exposure. She rose then, unhurried, her stained jacket clinging like battle scars. Standing, she commanded the room without raising her voice. I've listened to you call me a fraud. I've listened to you laugh while pouring wine over me. I've listened to you summon security to drag me out. She let the silence breathe before continuing. And all this time, I've owned more of this company than the lot of you combined. The truth was a hammer, and the hammer hit hard. The older director's face flushed crimson. This is a trick. You forged the records. Her hand lifted, silencing him. The assistant's voice came through the phone again. Verification distributed to all shareholders. Digital certificates confirmed. Miss Carter holds controlling interest. 51%. The final number crashed through the room like thunder. 51. Majority. Unquestionable. The analyst's camera shook, his hand trembling, but he didn't stop recording. He knew he was capturing more than humiliation, he was capturing history. She looked across the sea of faces, some pale with shock, some red with shame, all stripped of arrogance. Her words landed like a verdict. You wanted me out, but you never understood the truth. I don't need your seat. The seat exists because of me. Silence. Total, crushing silence. And for the first time, the storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The boardroom had never been so quiet. No one laughed now. No one jeered. The same men who had poured wine, barked orders, and spat insults suddenly seemed very small against the weight of her revelation. The older director who had led the attack clutched the edge of the table, his knuckles bone white. His mouth opened once, twice, but no words escaped. His authority had evaporated like mist under the noon Sunday. The smirking director who had yanked her chair stumbled backward, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. He raised a hand as though to explain, to backpedal, but found no words that could survive the evidence now stamped into the corporate record. The guards stood frozen, their posture stiff. A few seconds earlier, they had been ready to drag her out. Now realization weighed on them. They had almost laid hands on the one person who could have them fired with a single phone call. The junior analyst's phone shook as he filmed. He couldn't breathe properly, chest tight, but he didn't lower the camera. The footage had become something bigger than evidence, it was vindication. The associate with the tablet straightened her spine. For the first time since she'd been hired, her voice carried more power than fear. I saw her name in the system this morning, she announced, projecting into the silence. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an error. You ignored it. And now you've exposed yourselves. Her words hung in the air, and something subtle began to shift. The weight of shame moved outward, landing squarely on the men who had mocked, jeered, assaulted. Eyes around the room darted toward them, not her. A cough broke the silence, then a mutter, then a low chorus of disbelief from the junior staff who had been silent until now. I can't believe what I just saw. They poured wine on her, in her own boardroom. Ugh. This is going viral if it leaves this room. The directors' faces turned ashen. The older one slammed the table again, but the sound carried no authority this time. This is madness. She can't. She can. The associate cut him off, sharper now. And she just did. The analyst finally found his voice, shaky but real. I recorded everything, every word, every insult, every order. The world is going to see who you really are. Gasps rippled. A few of the directors turned on him instantly, their eyes sharp, but it was too late. The spell of intimidation had broken. He wasn't hiding anymore. The woman in white remained standing at the head of the table, calm, almost regal. She didn't need to gloat. The silence and the evidence spoke louder than any speech could. One of the guards stepped forward carefully, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, we didn't know. We were just following orders." His words stumbled like a man begging for reprieve. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The imbalance of power had already inverted. The men who thought they could erase her now stood erased by their own arrogance. And as the silence stretched, the storm inside the boardroom was no longer invisible. It was visible in every pale face, every trembling hand, every pair of eyes that dared not meet hers. The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was complete. The silence was brittle, ready to shatter, and she was the one holding the hammer. Her hand hovered briefly over the phone, then pressed a single button. The assistant's voice came through, clear, professional, merciless. "Miss Carter, command authorization?" She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. "Terminate access for every individual who acted against me in this room. Immediate." The response was swift. "Confirmed." Almost instantly, the smirking director's badge buzzed red in his pocket. He fumbled for it, disbelief etched across his face. The older director yanked his phone from the table only to see the screen flash, "Access denied." Another man reached for his laptop, but the system had already logged him out. The chain reaction swept through the room like falling dominoes. One by one, the men who had ridiculed her were locked out of the very empire they believed they controlled. Their emails cut, their doors barred, their signatures invalid. Panic rippled. "This isn't legal," one shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying the fear beneath. "It's corporate governance," she replied calmly. "And it's final." The guards, once poised to remove her, now took a step back, uncertain, their eyes wide. They knew better than to stand against the hand that signed their checks. The associate with the tablet spoke up again, her tone sharp with vindication. "She has the authority. Every action is time-stamped, logged, and binding." The analyst's phone captured it all. Men clawing at devices that no longer recognized them, faces draining of power as the systems they had once controlled now rejected them completely. "You can't do this," the older director rasped, his confidence in tatters. She turned her gaze to him, unblinking. "You did this to yourselves. I only finalized the paperwork." Her words landed like a gavel. One of the directors, pale and trembling, tried a different tactic. We can fix this. We'll issue a statement, an apology." "No," she interrupted softly. "You don't apologize your way out of contempt. You face the consequence of it." The phone lit again. "System confirms termination complete. Legal documentation prepared. Do you wish to proceed with contract dissolution?" She lifted her chin, wine stains stark against her white jacket like battle paint. "Proceed." The final confirmation chimed. The empire had shifted in less than a minute. The men slumped in their seats, stripped of the titles they had weaponized. Their humiliation was no longer private. It was systemic, permanent, irreversible. The analyst could barely keep his hands steady as he filmed. He knew he was recording more than a corporate decision. He was recording justice made visible. The woman in white placed her hand gently on the table, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. "This," she said, voice steady, "is what happens when arrogance mistakes silence for weakness." No one spoke. No one dared, because in that moment, the verdict was not just delivered, it was lived. The boardroom looked nothing like it had an hour ago. The laughter was gone. The arrogance had bled out. What remained was silence, thick, heavy, undeniable. She stood at the head of the table, wine drying on her jacket like a crimson crest. The very stain they had meant to humiliate her had transformed into her armor, proof that dignity doesn't vanish when tested, it hardens. One by one, the men avoided her gaze. The smirking director stared at the floor. The older one gripped his useless phone like a lifeline cut too soon. Even the guards bowed their heads, unsure whether to stay or leave. The junior analyst lowered his camera slowly, his eyes wide with something that felt like awe. The associate clutched her tablet tighter, her breath steady for the first time all afternoon. She let the silence stretch. And then, she broke it. "You thought my silence meant defeat. You thought my patience meant permission. You thought my presence at this table was a courtesy." Her voice was low, sharp, unhurried. "But I don't sit here because you allow it. I sit here because this table exists because of me." The words cut through the air like steel. She reached for her portfolio, sliding it under her arm. No rush, no dramatics, just quiet finality. Her eyes swept the room one last time, ensuring the weight of her presence lingered. "Record this moment well," she said. "Not on your phones, not in your minutes on your conscience. Because every time you think about what happened today, you'll remember, I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to stand on ceremony. My power was here, long before your insults, and it will remain long after your names are erased." No one moved. No one dared breathe too loud. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown only she controlled. At the threshold, she paused and turned slightly, leaving them with the final strike. "I don't need to film justice. I am the outcome of it." And with that, she stepped out, leaving the boardroom to collapse under the weight of its own